What's up, Buff fans? Troy and I are back with another episode of the CU Sports Report podcast, coming off a close loss against previously ranked number 18 Kansas State, and they lost a lot of talent in the wide receiver room during that game. But luckily, they're getting Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn back. Omarion Miller is likely out for the season, and Terrell Timmons is questionable with an undisclosed injury on when he's going to potentially return. It wasn't, a pretty game as you saw. It was really it was close, and they were really resilient in getting back into the game with losing Travis, which is a huge piece. But it ultimately came down to a questionable pass interference call against Will Shepherd. But we will get into that game in just a moment. They have Arizona at Arizona this weekend. I will be traveling to Arizona, which I am very excited about. And this looks to be a game that the Buffs can win. Arizona is missing a lot of pieces in the secondary, which will allow Colorado's wide receivers and Shedeur Sanders to play their best game. But of course, they're going to try to pressure and blitz and do all the things to stop Colorado's offense, which is interesting though. And I think we were all talking about this in the media yesterday. Is like why Arizona is favored 3.5 points in this game, and these are the odds that are updated yesterday. So this is post news of Travis Hunter being back. So interesting odds there, but I really do think that Colorado can come with a win in Arizona this weekend. It is kind of one of those must-win scenarios. It is one of their more attainable on the schedule as they move forward and to get closer to a bowl game. Um, Rewind to the Kansas State game, 8 p.m. kick. We know in those 8 p.m. kicks, some crazy stuff is going to happen, and I think certainly losing Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn was one of the more notable ones. But key plays from Colton Hood, who had a 59-yard interception return to put the Buffs in scoring position. They didn't run the ball that well. Sure, Sanders got sacked a bunch. Their defensive front was much more formidable, which than we saw against UCF, which is interesting because at the time, Kansas State's run defense was number 16, while UCF's run defense was number 13 last week. So they were able to play against a better run defense and beat them significantly out in Orlando. But when it came to Kansas State, they just didn't have a lot of answers. Of course, the right side of the line was getting beat a bunch. And they just couldn't, they just did not run the ball. And it seems like they completely ditched the run. This week, though, we saw a clip of Pat Shermer saying that they're going to run the damn ball this week. But when you went over the tape, Kansas State, what do you feel like Colorado did well? What do you feel like they missed out on in that game?
Yeah, I'll start right where you left off with the running game. They did ditch it pretty much. They were pretty ineffective. I think schematically it's a tougher matchup for this specific Colorado team running the ball against Kansas State versus UCF. Kansas State runs that 3-3 defense. And CU struggles. They block really well at the point of attack and they struggle to get up to the second level and pick up linebackers. So you put more linebackers on the field for Kansas State, whereas UCF was in that four down front most of the day. Um, it's just a tougher matchup. It's just a tougher look for CU up front, and I think we saw that. I thought this was a really fun game. I loved the chess match. Both teams had a bye before they leading in, so both had 2 weeks to prepare, and I think you saw that on both sides. Kansas State had some really nice pressure packages. I think they had a really good plan to get pressure on Shedeur Sanders without letting him kind of break contain and run around and make plays outside the pocket like we've seen him do so many times in past weeks. I think they pressured Shedeur Sanders on 40% of his dropbacks, which is really, really high. And they blitzed him 17 times, which is a lot.
Ooh.
Um, and they were coming after him. And then on the CU side, I thought that they had a really, really nice, I thought that Pat Shermer had a nice plan for attacking the short and intermediate areas of the field. I think that they did that really, really well in this one. How about this for a stat? Shedeur Sanders, when throwing within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, so behind the line of scrimmage or closer than 10 yards down the field, he was 25 for 25. He was perfect. I thought he played a really good
Wow.
game. The negative plays hurt. The sacks hurt. We can get into that in a minute. But I thought that his accuracy was on display. I thought he played with pretty good timing for most of the night. And I think the passing game really worked in the second half, especially as a result.
Yeah, 388 yards, 34 40, three touchdowns, and one interesting interception towards the end of the game. Draylon Miller was the target, but it just looked like an overall misread that Colorado was able to bounce back from luckily, but it was uh, an interesting mistake that we saw from Shador that he kind of rarely does there. Yeah,
Uncharacteristic, yeah. He had pressure.
yeah,
That was one of his dropbacks where he was pressured. It was all at his feet. He couldn't step into the throw, and he just sailed it. But yeah, that was an odd mistake, one that you don't see very often from him.
yeah. I'm kind of staying on the offensive side of the ball. Just losing Omarion was significant, to say the least. We were talking to LeJontay Wester on Tuesday, and he was saying that before the game, Omarion was like, he feels like this is going to be one of those games. And it turned out to be one of those games with 8 catches and 145 yards. His biggest game this season, I believe, of his career. I don't know, he had a big game against USC, but losing him was terrible to see, broken lower leg injury that was likely going to put him out for the rest of the season. That's what Deion Sanders said on Tuesday. And he also said that he is like the fifth man of the receiving group with Will Shepherd, LeJontay, Travis, and Horn. And he is just one of those guys that's such a young star. I was talking to Adam Munster Tiger, and he was comparing it to losing Jordan Tyson a couple of years ago. It's just a young guy that's like getting into the game, really flashing, and then all of a sudden you see that his season is over. Really, really unfortunate there. And I think with his loss, we're going to see some more action from Draylon Miller and Jordan Avonje. Avonje? Hopefully I'm saying that right. Sorry, Jordan, if I'm mispronouncing that. But he said on his two legendary podcasts, Shador said that Jordan's going to be coming off the bench and he trusts him as well as a wide receiver. Both Miller and Jordan are true freshmen, but Shador gave Jordan kind of like the nod of, okay, I see what you can do, and this is your time to step up and be a bigger contributor while Omarion and Terrell Timmons are going to be out. So they're going to have to reach into their depth for Arizona. So that was definitely the biggest, I think, storyline of the game. Losing, you don't see a game very often where they lose four of their top four wide receivers
For
in
the
one
top
game.
six, really.
Yeah, literally,
Crazy.
literally. And luckily, excuse me, luckily, wow, my voice there. Travis Hunter is going to be back, and that was just such a huge, definitely made national news when Deion Sanders announced that on Tuesday, getting Travis Hunter back in the fold because we didn't know how severe his injury was. Same with Jimmy Horn Jr. Jimmy Horn Jr. practiced yesterday as well. Kind of going an off tangent here of all the injuries, but luckily those guys are going to be back in the fold here. It's and back into like where they're going to run the ball. Like it was interesting that they ran down Hayden like twice in the first half and down just ran straight into Kansas State's defensive front. The offensive line didn't really do the best job in moving bodies. It wasn't really able to run in between the tackles, and they just said that they were down, so they didn't want to run the ball, but they still could have tried a little bit more. I mean, we saw Isaiah Augusta towards more the end of the game get in for that touchdown. It was a short, I think, 1 yard rush. So there was instances like that they used him, but you saw in the way that they were deficient that maybe part of the reason why they weren't fully able to grab this game is because they were back to that one-dimensional offense where the run game was really, really lacking, and were just relying completely on their pass game, which was successful and they were close, but the difference in what we saw against UCF, a season high rushing yard, 128 rushing to minus 29 plus, all the time Shador got sacked. It's really disparate. And you see the way the offense is so much more improved, how much more dominant they are when they do have the run incorporated into the game rather when they don't. Minus 29 rushing yards for the game. Maybe this was a piece here as well as the run defense on the other end, which we'll get into, but a piece that Colorado was really missing and potentially, getting a win out of here. I mean, of course, Kansas State really ran the ball all over Colorado, so it goes both ways. And the trenches have always been a point of contention this season. We've seen the ups and the downs, and this was another down game to where I thought they'd be able to be. I thought they'd be able to sustain a little bit more of that progress that they showed against UCF, but it was back to like, oh, this is uh, not ideal and kind of the same as we anticipated at the beginning of the season. Yeah.
Yeah, it hurts. It hurts them in the passing game too. At that point, I mean, you mentioned the total. That is factoring in the sacks, which is still the dumbest way to keep a stat. Sacks should not count against rushing yards, but
Yes.
um, the when you can't run the ball on early downs, then you're forced to take longer developing passing plays and longer drops on late downs and obvious passing situations, and that's when Kansas State sent all of those exotic pressure packages and got after Shedeur Sanders. And they got these big negative plays in the second half once they realized, hey, this team is not going to run the ball. Then you can send them on every down. And we saw that Sanders took 6 sacks in this game, and the total net loss on those sacks was 74 yards, which is way too many.
Yeah. Jeez.
This is a passing game that is good enough to they can live from 2nd and 16 like that. They have viable chances to move the ball from 2nd and 16. If you're at 2nd and 6 and then you get sacked and you're in 3rd and 12, they can still they're talented enough, and Shedeur Sanders is a good enough quarterback to be able to pick that up. But when they're taking sacks on first down and it's 2nd and 24, 2nd and 26, when you're in 3rd and 19, like those are the sacks that are really, really killing these drives. And that was, I think, one of the bad habits that Shedeur Sanders got back into a little bit was he was too deep in his drop. He was drifting backwards. There was a couple of times where he took sacks after he dropped back to about like 13 to 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage, which just makes it so difficult on your tackles, right? To pass protect. So that he's been better about that this year. I'm very confident that that's not going to continue. It just popped up a couple of times in this game and on a few drives where it really ended up hurting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think Shador took some accountability there with his dropbacks, and there definitely were some long ones where the tackles definitely couldn't hold on for much longer until those edge guys came in and put the pressure on him, and he ended up getting into the ground. Um, I think in this we'll get into Arizona, but I don't think the pressure will be as yeah, excruciating this upcoming week, which is good. On the other side of the ball, it was DJ Giddens all the way, 182 yards, and they ran for again the Wildcats ran for 185 total yards. So it was just all DJ Giddens all day. Anytime he had the ball in his hands, he was able to run right up the middle. They were providing some, good gaps there. But what really hurt the Buffs was many missed tackles. Most of them, most of them by Shiloh Sanders. There were some highlights there, but DJ Giddens just would not go down, and it just was a lot of misreads on getting him getting him to the ground, and there weren't any secondary guys past Shiloh going downhill, and they had to really pick up the slack to try to get him down. And also, I know there's one play too where he rolled out and he was open for a pass play. He dropped it, and if he caught it, it could have been a touchdown. He was really doing the
Yeah.
absolute most for Kansas State and really allowing them to stay in this game. I mean, Avery Johnson, he had a couple scrambles too. I know the Buffs have been up and down with quarterback draws and kind of stopping the run there, but I think they did a good job limiting him. But what they were a really balanced team on both sides of the ball, 238 passing yards and of course 185 rushing yards. When you're watching the Buffs run defense, because I was just like I mentioned, I was just surprised by the drop off from what we saw against UCF, holding RJ Harvey to a season low, to allowing DJ Giddens and the Buffs allowing their first individual opponent to 100 yards. They were the last Power Five team to hold an opponent to less than 100 yards, and then DJ Giddens was the first to obtain that. It was just a very different team. When you were watching, were they doing anything differently, or were they just running it all over?
I'll get to schematic in a second, but the first, I have to start this by giving credit to DJ Giddens, who was pretty easily the most impressive individual player that CU has played against this season. On either side of the ball, really. That guy was a beast. He was creating so many yards for himself between the tackles, on the outside, at the second level, breaking tackles, running through guys, running over guys. He was amazing. He forced 12 missed tackles in this game by himself. CU missed 17 tackles. 12 of them were on DJ Giddens, which is a ridiculous number for one game. That is so many. Out of his 182 yards that you mentioned, 140 of them came after contact. So, CU was getting hands on him relatively early in the down a lot. But they just couldn't get him on the ground. He had the big catch on the final drive that set up the game-winning touchdown on the CU blew a coverage on that play. But he was just making plays. Really, really, really good back, and somebody that we'll be watching on Sundays in the coming years. Schematically, they did some cool stuff. I've talked about how Colorado's run defense has been so good because of their aggressiveness. They get downfield, they get up, they get downhill, they get penetration into the opposing backfield. They're really good at it. The linebackers are really good at it. The defensive tackles have been really good about it. Anquin Barnes has lived in backfields at times this year. Chidozie Nwankwo is just an anchor in the middle. So what Kansas State was doing is they were saying they were welcoming the CU defensive tackles into their backfield and they were trapping them. They were leaving them unblocked at first. Sometimes they did it to both tackles on the same play, which was really, really interesting. They would leave them unblocked. The guys head up on CU's defensive tackles would just climb up to the linebackers right away, and they would pull a guard and they would pull. Sometimes it was their tight end, sometimes it was a tackle, and they would, when the defensive tackles got about 3 yards of the backfield or so, they would just kick him out. And Giddens was by him right away. And then you get those interior guys up to the second level immediately, and that really is what sprung some of those chunk runs. So I thought that was really cool by Chris Kleiman and Connor Riley to kind of use that aggressive mentality that CU has again, kind of flip it against them. So I thought that was how they opened a lot of stuff up in the running game. And then they did a lot of standard stuff too, some zone, some power. And Giddens was just he's very patient. I thought that he did a really good job letting blocks develop, and then it's just impossible to arm tackle that guy. If you don't square him up, he's not gonna get on the ground. So I was really impressed. It wasn't a great performance from the CU run defense, as you mentioned, but I'm not down on them by any means. I don't think after this game. I think that it was a really good game plan from Kansas State combined with a stout offensive line and a truly elite back, one of the best in the country. And sometimes they get the better of you. That's how it went.
Yeah, I was very, very impressed with DJ Giddens. Anytime he had the ball in his hands, I was like, "Oh man, what is he gonna, what is he gonna do now?" Watching him from up above, and of course,
It
he
was
had,
almost surprising when he got tackled. It got
yeah,
to a point where it was surprising when he got tackled by one guy. It was like, oh, not, oh, really?
yeah. And I agree. It's like the run defense and getting into the backfield is it's still good. They had 4 sacks and four tackles for loss, 1 interception, and 3 pass breakups and overall defense. I think BJ Green, he had 2 of those sacks, and he's really getting into his game and showing a lot of what he did at Arizona State and taking a better role in this offense. My question to you is, do you think that was a pass interference at the end of the game?
Um,
A lot of people
no.
are saying yes.
A lot
Oh,
of, so it is like I don't think that it's not like if they threw a flag, it would have been like, what are they, it could have
yeah.
been called. It could have not been called. I think it was close. I will admit my bias as a person who played corner my whole life, so I don't think anything is pass interference. So let them play. All sides, let everyone play. I try to give the benefit of the doubt to corners who are turning to look and try to play the ball, which I can't remember which corner it was, but he was playing the ball a little late, but he was trying to play the ball. It was a close call. The call could have gone either way. You could justify calling it pass interference, but I don't think that it was like an outrageous miss by any means.
Yeah, I
Do you think it was pass interference?
I think it was pass interference. I just think that he just didn't give him a chance to make
Yeah.
a play on the ball. So, but I mean, that's how the cookie crumbled. And Coach Prime also said that that might have been a pass interference at the end of the game. But now we can't. Okay, we have to just move forward and could take the next play. And just that drive. I mean, that final drive as well. Philip Houston got called on a false start and moved them from third and 6 to third and 11. So, which then turned into that fourth down play to Will Shepherd that they weren't able to convert, and that was the end of the game. Also, that Preston Hodge allowed that touchdown at the end of the game. I mean, it was a strong go ball. I was in the end zone watching that, and I was like, oh man, this is the this is the game. We're gonna have a game like Baylor, and I was never fully out of it because after witnessing what they did against Baylor, they could have they could have done maybe another Hail Mary situation. I don't know. They had a
I
chance
thought
to win it and it fell short.
I thought it was going to overtime for sure. It
Same.
was a clean game on the penalty front. They did play one of their cleanest games really since Deion Sanders has been here. Only 5 penalties for I think 20 yards. That was a positive. I thought it was interesting the final drive. This is my last thing, and then we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot was made of Robert Livingston playing a lot of cover two against UCF. And it was kind of contrary to what you would expect against a running team, bringing a safety out of the box. But it worked. And then they did the same thing against Kansas State, and it obviously didn't work as well against the run, but they stuck with it. They play a lot of man still. They just don't. They've switched to go. They've gone from playing an unholy amount of man coverage to just playing a lot of man coverage and then
Oh,
mixing in some cover two. They still play a lot of man when we say that they're playing cover two. Um, but they did play more cover two again. But then on the final two series, the Colton Hood interception and the touchdown, they there was 11 snaps and they played man coverage on 9 of them. So they kind of got out of the cover two and they kind of went back to their bread and butter. And on the first drive, it worked. They blitzed Avery Johnson into couple of inaccurate balls and that interception. And then on the last drive, you saw the flip side of it where they blow a coverage on DJ Giddens and he goes wide open for 35 yards, and then you get beat for the touchdown. Um, there's no there's no take there about what they should be doing. That was just I thought it was interesting that they kind of reverted back to the man heavy scheme when the game really got tight.
mm-hmm. Robert Livingston doing a pretty exceptional job, I think, so far. There are some miscues and mishaps, but his eye for what this team needs, he's usually spot on most of the time. And last game, it was just yeah.
There's no reason to be down on if you were up on CU before Kansas State, as I think all of us were. I know you and I both were. There's no reason to be down on them. They lost a 3-point game against a really, really good team, um, who is really stout on both sides of the ball. And you know, you play a coin flip game, and sometimes the other team makes the last play. That's how it is.
Yes, indeed. And this weekend, though, it looks like brighter skies in terms of winning, even though, as I mentioned, Arizona being the favorite. I don't think this is a game that Colorado can lose just because Arizona is missing a lot of key players. They're basically all their important guys in their secondary, Traden Stukes, cornerback, Gunnar Maldonado is safety, and Tacario Davis, who's also a cornerback, are all hurt. And their defensive coordinator said this is one of the biggest challenges he's had this season. So, and deservedly so. Colorado is a team that loves to pass the ball. They have ample wide receivers, and they're going to be tearing up the field. I imagine this game with so many missing pieces, their best players in the secondary. Colorado's really going to be able to manipulate them in a bunch of ways because they're going into their depth and trying to elevate guys against probably the best. I'm trying to figure out what, but Colorado's passing offense is one of the top 10 in the country. So Arizona is going to be really deficient downfield without, their top three guys there. So I think in turn, I'm going to just jumping into it here. It's going to be a game where a lot of pressure is going to be put on Shador because Arizona knows that their offensive line has, deficiencies at times. Sometimes Shador does have those long dropbacks there. So blitzing and pressure are going to be, of high priority against Arizona State in a backfield and downfield with guys that haven't have as much experience as the guys who have gotten hurt. Arizona, of course, is a really primarily passing team as well with Tatoria McMillan, 742 yards and 4 touchdowns. And him and Nova Fida, Coach Prime said on Tuesday, they're like best friends the same way that Shedeur Sanders and Travis are best friends. They just have been clicking all season. And, McMillan is one of the, top guys that maybe coming out of the draft this upcoming year. It's he's one of the best players in the Big 12 right now. So limiting him on defense, him and Travis are going to be going at it. And Travis hasn't allowed a touchdown this season. So McMillan does like to get into the end zone, but it'll be a really fun watch them going one on one and seeing if Travis Hunter does break open or McMillan finally gets a touchdown against Travis Hunter. He'll be the first to do it this season. When you watch Arizona, I mean, they're coming off two losses, close one against Texas Tech, 28-22, and they just got BYU is making teams look bad this season. BYU really
It's
did them
amazing,
dirty.
really.
Yeah, I know. BYU, man, they are sneaky out there. They really are. I they just they had BYU beat Kansas State significantly, and of course Arizona here. But Arizona is 3-3 on the season and 1-2 in conference play. It's interesting because they were picked fifth in the preseason, projected to finish fifth in the Big 12 in the preseason vote, and now they're looking like a team who is going to kind of be on the lower half of that. Just with the way that they're playing and the rest of their schedule, they're just not one of those prominent teams that we're now seeing against in this new Big 12 conference here. So I just see an advantage here for Colorado. Yes, Arizona is at home, but with the secondary being basically gone and Colorado having their 4 starting wide receivers back into the mix, seems like a game that Colorado can come away with a win. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
you touched on BYU. They're so fun to watch. I'm not going to go BYU, but they're really, really good. This is not like undefeated, like they're squeaking by a bunch of games that they could lose. No, they're really, really good. They're fun to watch. Their crowd rocks. So good for BYU.
Shut up, BYU.
Yeah, shout out to BYU. Keep doing your thing. They're not on CU's schedule, so keep doing your thing. Um, I'll start with when Colorado has the ball this weekend. And I'm just not sure what Arizona is going to do with all of these injuries. I don't know I mean, you mentioned Takario Davis, potential first round pick. He's questionable. He tweaked his groin, I think, that has been kind of bugging him throughout the year. You mentioned Gunnar Maldonado. We don't know if he's going to play. Traden Stukes, he's out. One of their best defensive linemen, Chubba Mae, he has missed the last 3 games, so we don't know what his status is. It's a lot, and Colorado is not the team that you want to play when you're missing 3 starters in the secondary. It just is not. It just is not. And maybe Davis ends up playing. Maybe Maldonado ends up playing, but it it's going to be tough for Arizona. They don't like to send extra pressure most of the time. The trend when I was looking was that they don't really blitz teams with good quarterbacks, and the only team they really blitzed the crap out of was Utah, who was starting Isaac Wilson in that game. Maybe they go back to it because their defense played really, really well in that game, one of the best performances of the season. But they didn't blitz Jake Retzloff a lot in Provo last week. They didn't blitz Baron Morton a lot against Texas Tech. So I would assume that they are not going to blitz Shedeur Sanders a lot either. But when you don't get pressure on Shedeur Sanders, you lose. That is just how it goes. I mentioned the 25 for 25 from Shador last week within 10 yards. He was also 28 of 29 with all three of his touchdowns when he was not under pressure. So he just picks defenses apart. He's too accurate. His anticipation is elite. Um, and he just, if you give him time to survey the field with all of the weapons that they have, you're going to get carved up. I'm not sure if CU is going to be able to run the ball. Arizona's kind of middle of the pack against the run. They're middle of the pack in most stats defensively. Deion Sanders did say that he thinks Isaiah Augustov is going to get the start at running back, which will be interesting. I think that he's been one of their more effective backs this year. So we'll see if one, they commit more to running the ball, and two, if they're able to against a team that should be a little bit easier to run on than Kansas State was. But at this point, um, I just don't know how Arizona can hold up in the secondary if CU has Travis back, has Jimmy Horn back. Will Shepherd's banged up, but he's expected to play. Um, they play a lot of zone. They man up the backside of trips, so they'll zone the trip side and they'll play man on just the single receiver. So I'm curious. A lot of times for CU, that is Will Shepherd, who has shown that he can win down the field. So he should get some shots. But yeah, CU take care of the ball. Protect Shador Sanders against the 3 4-man rushes. Arizona does have linebacker Jacob Manu back. That'll be big for them. He got ejected for targeting 2 minutes into the game last week. Change
Tough.
targeting, please. I'm at the forefront. Reform the targeting rule. Please stop ejecting players for making tackles. Um, but yeah, I really we can get to the other side of the ball, but I don't I think this is a really tough matchup for Arizona with the way that their injuries are looking right now, and I think that not that CU's offense needs a get right game. Like they played well last week. They gained a bunch. They gained 350 some yards. But I think that this could be a big day for Shador and the guys on the outside.
Yeah, this is like certainly a game that they, appear to have the upper hand in with all the tools that they have on offense and the lack thereof that Arizona has in their secondary. Yeah, running the ball. If Pat Shermer says in that clip he's going to run the damn ball, I'm interested to see how Isaiah Augusto steps up in that role because he leads the Buffs with the most yards this season. But, as we've seen, it's pretty disparate every week. We don't really know what they're going to show. It depends on what the other side's offensive front is giving, and it's kind of an up and down guessing game on what we're going to see. I know they tried down Hayden a couple times. I wonder because it's always been that three back rotation. However, Hayden didn't have. He's kind of getting back into it after returning against UCF. He didn't have, of course, a fantastic game against Kansas State, and Michael Welch is nursing a hamstring injury, so he's kind of in and out. I don't know if he is going to get as many touches as maybe as prior. So that three back rotation, it's always who's going to get the green light this week, and it seems like Isaiah Augusto, which maybe it's his time because he hasn't gotten a start this season, and this will be his opportunity to show why he can be maybe that all-purpose back. Even though I do see Down Hayden more in that role when he is more accessible when they open up the offense a little bit better. But Isaiah is like one of those big bodied running backs that has, 6'2" stature, able to, run out and push some guys over similarly, maybe not, yeah, not in like DJ Giddens style, but similar stature to where he can run over guys if he has the opportunity. So if Pat Shermer says they're going to run the damn ball, we'll see it. We'll potentially see it against an Arizona front that, isn't, they're all right, but not in the same caliber as we saw against Kansas State. So defense, though, Buffs defense, their secondary has been such a pleasure to watch this season. Cam Solomon Craig is just such an effective tackler. He is just one of the heartbeats downfield. And getting Travis Hunter back too, as I mentioned, just seeing Tutori McMillan and him going one-on-one against each other, it's hard to limit a wide receiver that is, that effective. And this will be maybe one of Travis Hunter's most difficult challenges this season. But as Travis Hunter does, he is really up for any task that is put in front of him. I think I'm also just concerned with the injuries as well, because they all like Will Shepherd, Jimmy Horn Jr., Travis, like they said, Coach Prime said they should play for certain and they will play, but in my mind, it's like, is there still some fragility there coming off the injury? It's hard to bounce back in a week. Sometimes you still feel those things, and one wrong hit, one wrong move can put them back on the sideline again, which would be terrible to see. But I think the injuries again are a big concern of mine going into this week, and they cannot afford to lose Travis Hunter this season as he goes on his Heisman campaign. So I think secondary is in good hands. Stopping, they're going to have eyes on one guy, of course, former Buff Montana Lamonius Craig. So going to have a revenge game of his own, and this will be, a team that is going to be primarily passing the ball, but they do have, a couple of running backs. Quali Conley, 458 rushing yards and 6 TDs this season. They kind of use him for those short gains, short touchdown runs. He's able to get into the end zone, as we've seen with the 6 touchdowns, and they're capable of using him and opening him up. But those, when I watch this team, those are the two primary playmakers that Colorado's going to be game planning for.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I said that the CU offense doesn't really need to get right game, but the run defense does need to get right game, and I think that they might be in for one here. Arizona's just 84th in the country in rushing. That's not really their new head coach Brent Brennan's MO. Is not running the football. So I think that the CU run defense has a chance to have a lot of success. The passing game will be interesting. I'm curious. This is probably the chess match that I'm schematically am the most curious to see, what Brent Brennan comes out and tries to do, and how Robert Livingston ends up countering that. Arizona does a lot of stuff out of condensed splits, out of bunches. They make it tough for you to man them up, basically. And it helps Tet McMillan get a lot of free releases. And then on the other side, you have CU, who's been playing a little bit more zone. Everything, at least in my eyes, points to CU playing more zone. A lot of bunches, easier to play zone. Zone limits the scrambling of Noah Fafita, which he doesn't do a lot, but he can be effective when doing that. So zone coverage helps that. And they've been playing more of it recently. So I'm curious to see if that's the route that CU goes. But they have manned up some teams that have been in bunch this year, so they could stick with the man. I'm curious to see if Travis follows McMillan. He hasn't shadowed any receiver this year, I don't think. Um, and then on the other hand, they have not really played a receiver. They haven't really played a true number one receiver all year. Torrey Horton was, out there at 50% probably when CSU played them. So that I'm not counting that because of how limited he was. So we'll see if Travis ends up following Tet around. I hope so. As a nerd, I just would love to watch them go at it all day. But I'm curious about that. And then Arizona does a lot of stuff. They put McMillan in the bunch. They get him, just to get him free release, just to get him some separation. He gets targeted on like a third of Fafita's passes. You mentioned they're best friends. They played high school together in California. So those two have played together for a long time. They've got really, really good chemistry. And McMillan is a marvel, man. He reminds me of Mike Evans a little bit. He just such a big body, but he moves so fluidly. Um, but the CU secondary in this game will have a chance to force some turnovers. Fafita has kind of had an odd year. He's not played as well as he did last year. His decision making has been kind of spotty. He's forcing it downfield a lot. He's tied for the second most interceptions in the nation, with 9. He's thrown 9 picks and just 8 touchdowns. So he's been giving the ball away. Some of those get tipped. I think he had a tipped interception against BYU and against Texas Tech, but he is a shorter quarterback, so that's a chance for the CU defensive line. Can we get some deflections? Can I get some batted balls? He had a fumble against BYU also. He's willing to stand in against pressure. He'll stand in the pocket and rip it, but that's where some of those interceptions come from. If he's just trying to rip downfield throws, the CU defensive backs will have chances to make plays. Um, And that could be the difference in a game like this, right? If Shador Sanders isn't under pressure and he's taking care of the football and Noah Fafita's pushing it into coverage and he's kind of being forced to do that, we've seen that the CU secondary, they get beat some because they play so much man. That's just the nature of it, but they make plays on the ball. We've seen it from Preston Hodge. Obviously, we know what Travis is all about. We've seen Cam Sillman Craig able to do that. Um, so I'm curious to see what kind of concepts that Arizona comes up with in the passing game, especially out of those bunches. But I do think over the course of the game that Fafita is going to give these CU defensive backs a couple of chances, and they've got to take advantage.
Yeah, maybe we'll see some more creativity from Arizona's offense. But with everything considered, seems like Colorado. I don't want to jinx it though. I am a master of jinxing things. I just Colorado is has much more on the table here than what Arizona has. So when I look at this game, I'm thinking of my score prediction now. Yeah, I feel like it's gonna be pretty high scoring on Colorado's end. So I'll go I'll go Colorado 35, Arizona 24. How about
Interesting.
you?
I have them even more high scoring than that. I have Colorado 41, Arizona 27.
Yeah, feels about right. This is a game that Colorado can
They
really,
need it.
yeah, they need it, and they're
If they want to win the Big 12 or be in the conversation to win the Big 12, they need it because two conference losses is probably the way Iowa State's playing and the way BYU's playing, the way Texas Tech has been playing. Two conference losses makes it a real steep climb. So CU needs
oh
it.
yeah,
I think this is a good spot for
yeah, exactly. And Colorado is still, even with those two losses, if they, potentially win out the rest of the season, which could potentially be a challenge, they'll certainly be in that conversation beyond a bowl game and a college football playoff if they stay, in this winning contention to stay in the win column. But looks like a fun one. I'm excited to go to Arizona. I've never been there before. And it won't be as hot. It's
them.
supposed to be like 72.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
it'll be
Bronze
it'll be a
used
nice one
to
down there. And yeah, looking forward to another college football Saturday, continuing on the season, kind of the mid-season where it might hit a lull. And last year too, I think another conversation we had this week, Colorado was 4-2 last year, and of course they didn't win another game
No,
for the rest of the season. But this year is different with the coaching
this is a
staff, with the
much better
assets.
football team, guys.
Yeah, it
Much better.
is. They
They really are
have a
much.
lot more assets, a lot more winning capabilities than last year.
So I
And
fully understand the CU football fan PTSD, but this is a legitimately they are a really good football team this year.
they are indeed. I mean, yeah, you got Shador Sanders going number one and then Travis going number two this year. So how can you not win with the top two draft picks for this upcoming draft? Anyways, I'm going to stop talking because we've talked enough. And we're going to head out. Thanks, guys, for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.